período de mais crescimento, de mais distribuição de renda, de mais inclusão social na América Latina, aconteceu de 2000 a 2014, com a eleição de Kirchner, Lagos, Cristina, Lula, Evo Morales, Chaves, Rafael Correa. Foi um momento de ouro da América Latina. Agora você está vivendo um momento da extrema-direita que estão fracassando de forma absurda. O Macri é um desastre na Argentina e ele é a solução. Tem um livro...
Por que isso está acontecendo?
Tem um livro do Mia Couto, que é grande escritor
really
moçambicano.
And the other is very disruptive.
Tem uma frase que é o seguinte: em tempo de terror, escolhemos monstros para nos proteger.
So this is Illicit History. Michael Brooks was a contributor for the Majority Report, and a very, very good foreign correspondent for different
Lula
political
da
issues,
Silva
especially
is
Lula,
currently the world's
who's
most prominent political prisoner.
in election right now.
Leaked chat logs published by The
Boy
Intercept
Glenn
have proven that the
Greenwald.
corruption
Let's
charges
go.
that put him in prison were politically motivated.
But how did Lula get such powerful political enemies? As Brazil's president from 2003 to 2010, he oversaw massive economic growth that brought tens of millions out of poverty. This success in the eyes of Brazil's elite was perceived as a threat to the social order and to their way of life. Lula himself understood this dynamic.
Ou seja, na América Latina, toda vez que apareceu um presidente que tentou fazer política social, ele foi derrubado. Todas as vezes. A elite brasileira e a elite de outros países não aceitam uma política de desenvolvimento que tem inclusão
His prior
social.
comment that in times of terror,
Lula
we
has
choose
seen this
monsters
cycle
to lead
play out
us.
before. Back in the
It's-
early
I think
1960s,
could also
Brazil
be
was
used,
run by a
currently
social
in this election
democrat
against
who ushered in
Bolsonaro,
a
who's
series
like a
of
fascist
left-wing
leader.
reforms, like the agrarian land reform
so
and the nationalization of the privately owned oil refineries.
Despite that interview,
The president
prior, I think it's
himself
very,
is not a
very
man of the
important
left. He
currently
was
as well.
pushed thanks to vibrant social movements on the ground.
In the early 60s, many in the student movement were radicalized by the Cuban Revolution and saw the country's hard left turn as something to emulate.
The Brazilian
Still
elite were
radicalized
threatened by
by
these
Che Guevara.
reforms, even if they came short of revolution. Rather than respect the democratically elected president's mandate, they instead chose to support a military coup. Their plan received assurance and backing from the United States.
The U.S. military dispatched
fucking
an
United
aircraft
States
carrier off
every
of Brazil's
time.
coast to establish a
time.
presence in the region and delivered weapons to Brazil's police for the purpose of
course they
riot
did.
control.
Arming, gotta
The
arm
U.S.
the
was
police
prepared to assist
in-
Brazil's
in
military
Brazil.
if they could not
And if we're
enact a
not
coup on
arming
their
the police,
own.
let's
Declassified
arm
documents have
mercenaries.
revealed that the Marines had planned to send troops to Sao Paulo to finish the job if needed. The dictatorship immediately aligned with U.S. interests and severed diplomatic relations with the USSR and Cuba. The student movement survived the military's initial rise to power in '64 and continued to agitate and organize. In 1968, student movements exploded across the globe. Brazil was no exception to these uprisings. In the March of that year, a flurry of students hit the country, culminating in 100,000 people marching in the streets of Rio de Janeiro after a
talk a
high school
lot
student was
about,
killed by the police during a demonstration.
How your
This upheaval got the
critiques of
attentions of the
elites
United
and,
States
the U.S.
and the CIA. While the CIA did not see the students as
so
an outright
in this
threat
case,
to the
I think
military
in some
junta,
cases,
they
a
did
lot of,
see the student movement
there's a
as a
lot of
source of instability in
in
other
that direction,
countries.
but
I
this
don't
is
even
definitely
call it
spread to
hate or
Brazil.
critique. I think it's just
The military
acknowledgement
dictatorship
that
had to stabilize
CIA
the situation,
has
especially
done a lot
once
of
public
kind of, like,
criticism
messed
had
up.
reached the halls of Brazil's
I'm not even saying
Congress.
you particularly.
Near the
but,
end of
like, in general.
1968, the
Sorry.
military
Society.
junta issued something
But this
called
is
the
like-
Fifth
we got receipts here
Constitutional
though, so
which suspended all legislative bodies and gave the military the legal framework to purge its enemies. The student movement, as well as other social movements, largely went underground during the following decade. Meanwhile, Lula da Silva rose through the country's nascent union movement, actually managing to win some gains for workers in an incredibly hostile political environment. This climate
I told you,
meant
it takes like one
that the
person,
Metal Workers
right?
Union avoided
One
strikes for most
human
of the
being has got
1970s.
the
Throughout the
personality
decade, to
draw
maintain
in a
legitimacy,
movement.
certain aspects of democratic society were allowed to return in a limited fashion. Congress was brought back in 1970. The Fifth Institutional Act was repealed. Persons accused of political crimes could no longer be banished, and the rights of political expression were restored. The next year, the Metal Workers Union, now helmed by Lula, seized this opportunity and went on strike for the first time since the dictatorship started 15 years
Helmed
earlier.
by one person, but also
During this struggle,
the fact
Lula
that
formed the
unions
Workers'
is,
Party,
like, massively
known in
influential
Brazil
in the
as
story
PT.
as well.
The PT's coalition was made
Unions
up
are
both
still
of union workers,
influential
as well as academics, intellectuals,
Northeast United
and members
States.
of the liberation theology movement.
Some unions are stronger.
The intellectuals were the political descendants of the country's student movement.
The dictatorship imprisoned Lula in 1980 because of his role in leading the strikes. This happened despite the regime's restored protections for political speech. During Lula's prison sentence, metal workers continued their strike and demanded the release of their leader. When Lula's mother died, he received a pass to attend her funeral. 2,000 workers met him at the cemetery, all chanting Lula Livre, or Free Lula.
Based.
Lula was released from prison on May 20th.
The same day the strike ended. Lula's political work would now focus on building the Workers' Party as its president. In the early 1980s, inequality skyrocketed, leading to problems like widespread poverty, illiteracy, and malnutrition, in spite of massive GDP growth and economic development.
In 1985, the military could no longer coerce politicians in Brazil's electoral college. That year, the electors decided to elevate an opposition coalition to the presidency, and Brazil's dictatorship finally ended.
Shortly thereafter, Lula himself would be elected to Brazil's Congress representing PT. A constitutional assembly began to draft a new constitution, which would eventually be enacted in 1988. It protected
A
the
lot
right
of
to strike,
testosterone in that room.
banned censorship of art and literature. Land reforms were also proposed to combat
I think at
inequality.
that time it's more beggars can't
But
be
austerity
choosers, but
measures
you'll see in a
to
bit. You'll see
fight
in a bit.
inflation caused
gets
by the
better.
dictatorship prevailed, hindering the advancement of Brazil's poorest citizens.
Sorry.
In 1988, Lula made his first run for the presidency. Lula was able to survive until the election's final round, but he ultimately lost. Throughout the 1990s, Brazil's military and financial elite fought for the
currently in the
country's
second
political
round of
and
the-
economic
of his
reforms tooth
current
and
election,
nail. Lula still could not win
Although
the
Bolsonaro
presidency,
had a very,
How
very
many
despite
elections
strong
do
showings
they
in
have
several
in
elections.
Brazil?
This changed in
At a
2002.
They
time.
do multiple rounds.
After an
and then,
economic downturn, Brazil's
as it
voters were looking
progresses,
for
the
something
candidates
new.
are like limited down.
And Lula,
Currently,
after
the,
several previous attempts,
Bolsonaro,
made it to the election's
for certain
second round.
polling, did a lot
He
better.
would go
than
on
was
to win
expected
with
to,
his
so we'll have to
staggering
see how
number
that
of
goes.
votes,
It's like
52.7
interesting
million.
way to go.
Lula's landslide meant that Brazil's
Very
first
cool.
left government in 40 years came in with a resounding mandate to deliver progress
Lula
to
already
the
won
Brazilian
once.
people.
So.
Você tá lembrado qual foi a atitude que eu tomei quando eu ganhei as eleições?
Claro.
Você tá lembrado que eu coloquei todo o ministério num avião e levei todos os ministros para os 4 lugares mais pobres do Brasil? O que eu queria com aquilo? Eu queria que um Meirelles, que era banqueiro, eu queria que um Palocci, que era médico, eu queria que um Furlan, que era empresário, conhecesse uma palacita, que visse o homem e a mulher no mesmo lugar que eles defecavam, eles comiam.
The administration prioritized
Valid.
combating hunger
That's
and
fucking
poverty
valid.
through its
Like,
Bolsa
yeah.
Familia
Am I allowed
program.
to swear?
Employment
Yeah,
and
yeah,
wages
100%.
rose.
It's pretty
Educational
fucking based, right?
opportunities
Right?
were radically
Oh my
expanded.
god.
Spending priorities were put into
Yeah.
place to phase out
We
hunger.
should do
Especially,
that.
it's pretty
Lula
refreshing
would
coming from the
achieve
American
in
kind
the
of
second term of his
standpoint.
presidency. And
Absolutely.
various other structural reforms which culminated in lifting 40 million people out of poverty. Brazil's elite saw these reforms as threats, and they were determined to put a stop to the PT. Nevertheless, they failed to beat Lula at the ballot box for a second time in 2006. Lula's second term, the economy boomed while living standards continued to rise for the Brazilian people. Under Lula's leadership, Brazil even managed to weather the 2008
Are they
economic
gonna
crisis.
name the elite?
Mas é fundamental que todos
Are they
façam
gonna
sua
name
parte.
the elite?
É
Name the
importante que os
actions the
empresários
elite
sigam
took
investindo.
to,
É imprescindível que
you
os
know,
trabalhadores
stop
defendam a
him? Or are they
produção
just
e o
gonna
emprego.
say it as like a
Já o setor
generalized?
financeiro
Okay.
deve trabalhar para estimular o crédito e baixar os juros que estão muito altos.
They're
Left office in
yeah, it's not just like
2010
a proverbial
with an
elite,
over
which is sometimes
80%
very
approval
unhelpful.
rating.
There's like
Lula's
specific people.
successor, former underground
It's not just an
anti-dictatorship
idea.
activist
Alright,
Dilma
cool.
Rousseff won the 2010 election.
See?
In
Successor
February
was
2014, the Lava Jato investigation
We're celebrating
No!
50 years of Popeye signature chicken with a deal
Whatever.
you'll love.
You get your
Now
time
for
in
just
Popeyes. I don't
$6.99,
even
takes
care
50
anymore.
years of crunchy, juicy
But are
chicken
you
we've
gonna
been
like
serving since
go
1972.
over it? Or are you just
No,
gonna
we're just
upload
keeping
it
we're
with the
keeping
Popeyes?
Popeyes in here.
Listen,
On God.
Popeyes, mashed potatoes, and
began.
Cajun gravy.
The state
Okay,
oil company
it's
Petrobras
great,
was
and
implicated at the
biscuits.
center of a massive corruption scandal. Dilma was accused of participating in the graft scheme, but no proof ever emerged. She managed to win re-election that fall, but plans to oust her were soon underway.
She would be impeached in 2016 in dubious
She's
and
got strong
illegitimate
Margaret Thatcher
circumstances
vibes
by
going
a
on with that
corrupted
haircut.
political process.
With the haircut
The
exclusively.
Lava
Yeah.
Jato investigation claims
Definitely a
to be
little bit
taking a
different
sweeping
politics,
look at
for
structural
sure.
corruption that had plagued Brazil's
Yeah, I'm
political
talking
system,
exclusively
but
aesthetic.
largely focused on the PT and Lula. Lula, intended to run for president again in 2018, was instead put in prison, unable to run in a race that all polls showed him leading. Lula's absence
What?
from the ballot allowed for Jair Bolsonaro, a neo-fascist who praised the former dictatorship, to rise to the presidency.
Eu sou favorável à tortura, tu sabe
Is this
disso.
Brazil's
E o povo é favorável a isso
Current
também.
leader.
Bolsonaro governs with the support of the country's elites, as well as corporate elites, including the Wall Street Journal
Gross, the
editorial
worst
page.
kind of
But his
elite.
government has already begun to falter. A new student movement has hit the streets to protest education reforms, and the Lava Jato investigation that propelled him into office has been proven to be politically motivated thanks to leaks published by The Intercept. Lula himself is confident that Bolsonaro and other authoritarians around
Oh,
the world
God.
won't last for long and are doomed to fail like the military dictatorship before them.
Eu quero saber quantos dias eles vão pensar que estão me prendendo. E quanto mais dias eles me deixarem lá, mais Lula vai nascer nesse país e mais gente vai querer brigar nesse país. Porque a democracia não tem limite, não tem hora pra gente brigar. Por isso que eu estou fazendo uma coisa muito consciente, mas muito consciente. Eu falei para os
I like
companheiros,
everything he's
se
saying so
dependesse da minha vontade, eu não iria, mas eu vou. Eu vou porque eles vão dizer a partir da manhã que o Lula está foragido, que o Lula está escondido. Não, eu não estou escondido. Eu vou lá na barba deles, para eles saberem que eu não tenho medo, para eles saberem que eu não vou correr e para eles saberem que eu vou provar a minha inocência. Eu vou terminar com uma frase que eu peguei em 1982 numa menina de 10 anos em Catanduva, que eu não sei quem é. E essa frase não tem autor. A frase dizia: os poderosos podem matar uma, duas ou três rosas, mas jamais conseguirão deter a chegada da primavera. E a nossa luta é em busca da primavera.
So true.
I can't even, like, I don't speak Portuguese, but just reading it, you get goosebumps. It's fucking crazy.
It's true though, and like I said before, I don't believe in God or religion, right? And so I believe like the people who are on this planet today, we're the only ones that really matter. Maybe the ones coming in the future. So people have to be able to say we're done being like
Especially,
farmed.
like, yeah, knowing that there are, like, politicians, like, there to, like, genuinely create policies that are bringing, like, tens of millions of people out of, like, starvation, out of, and then having him jailed like
What was he jailed for?
basically it was like a corruption charge that didn't actually have any weight and was proven by The Intercept recently to actually have no water, which is clearly why he's able to run again, you know. And so it's a very, very contentious, especially when in Italy we've had the new, I believe, prime minister now, who's has some talking points that are a little, you know, on the more you know, identitarian side of things.
You know, I don't follow politics very much, so I don't know
yeah.
what's happening in Italy. I do know that they have an issue with racism over there, as in most places.
I think it's pretty well, at least the, if not racism, definitely the sense of pride and like nationality is very, very strong in Italy. So
No, I think like
a
lot of black
you know,
people are saying I don't feel safe
I'm willing
traveling
to agree.
Italy.
I'm willing to agree there, but you know,
that's what I've heard most about Italy recently.
But also their prime
fashion.
minister is like, you know,
A fascist.
But definitely a lot of political pundits have argued so, you know, maybe I'm a coward in saying not quite, but I you know, if we're going 50-50, I'm on the more fascist side for sure.
I'm just saying.
So especially in that vein,
I don't even know them, and I could guess.
Especially in that vein with Bolsonaro, and that election in Brazil happening, we have a chance of not only electing, not we have a chance obviously, but Brazil has a opportunity to not only move away from Bolsonaro, who's very corporate, you know, minded, into you know, helping
taking your state of mind away from
Brazil.
feeding the corporate machine, continuing to give money for the wealthy to mass and accumulate.
Or at least definitely a kind of more of a public approach to government as opposed to like top down, you know.
That's what we need.
So that is what we need.
We really do.
But yeah,
that's what the majority of human beings need.
But yeah, it was just like fun to do though.
Lula was cute.
Yeah, and we'll have to do more as well, for sure.
I want to know more about his politics. So you did good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
The plan, absolutely, cutie. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.